On a journey along the Gold Road between Skingrad and the Imperial City, the Breton writer Alexandra Hatrard would stumble across a magnificent ruin, half hidden among the trees. From the forest floor, 5 pure white columns jutted up into the sky, with grand arches looming high above the undergrowth. These were the ruins of the once great city of Seatatar, the shadow of the Fatherwood in the ancient elven tongue. It had once been a grand city of the Ayleids, the people also known as the Heartland High Elves. Before the ages of man, they had built a grand civilization in Cyrodiil, and established the first state in Tamriel that could truly be called an empire. But now, like all the cities of the Ayleids, the halls of Seatatar were empty, its people long since vanished into the mists of history. As Hatrard explored the crumbling ruins, he would muse on the lost glories of this fallen civilization and what disaster could have caused its downfall. As he noticed that the city's defensive traps were still functioning, he would conclude with a hint of irony. For it is clear, these devices were crafted in vain. They did not secure the Ayleids against their true enemies, which were not the slaves who revolted and overthrew their cruel masters, nor were they the savage beast peoples who learned the crafts of war and magic from their Ayleid masters. No, it was the arrogant pride of their achievements, their smug self-assurance that their empire would last forever, that doomed them to fail and fade into obscurity. But was it really pride and arrogance that caused the ultimate doom of the Ayleid civilization? Or was it something more insidious? Is it simply the case that all civilizations, no matter how mighty, are destined to one day crumble to dust? These are the questions we will seek to answer today as we explore the rise and fall of the Ayleids. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Blind Moth. Before we continue, please consider taking a moment to like and subscribe. It really does help the channel. And check out my other videos if you're interested in learning more about the world of the Elder Scrolls. Thank you. Like most peoples of Tamriel, the true origins of the Ayleids have been obscured by the relentless march of time, surviving only as myth and legend. Like all elves, they were descended from the Aldmer, who left their ancestral homeland of Aldmeris in time immemorial, establishing a new culture on the Somerset Isles. But this culture was rigid and hierarchical, enforcing a strict orthodoxy on its inhabitants. Many began to chafe under its rigid order, particularly those who disagreed with the Aldmer Elders' narrow interpretation of religion, which demanded strict enforcement of Aedra worship at the expense of all else. Soon, successive waves of migration would depart the Somerset Isles to found new civilizations on mainland Tamriel, unbound by the strictures of their ancestral home. The most famous of these were the Chaimer, ancestors of the modern Dark Elves, who followed the prophet Veloth into the east. It is theorized that the Dwemer also left for this reason, rejecting the gods of their ancestors and founding a new culture based on cold rationality. But another group of elves departed instead for the heartland of Tamriel, the untamed wilderness we now know as Cyrodiil. In time, they would become the culture we remember today as the Ayleids. Yet there is another explanation for the origins of the Heartland High Elves. During the Merethic era, the first elven explorers left their islands, sailing out to chart the coasts of the unexplored continent to their west. Most of their names are long forgotten, but one voyager by the name of Topal the Pilot has gone down in history as Tamriel's greatest explorer. His ship, the Niben, roamed the wild coasts of the continent, encountering strange creatures and feral beast folk. Eventually, they came across a bay, its waters calm and clear, at the mouth of a great river which wended its way inland. For 11 days and nights, the Niben sailed up the river which would one day bear its name, until it arrived at a vast lake, its crystal waters dotted with 8 islands. Topal was enraptured by the isles, and took his men ashore to explore them. But they soon realized they were not alone, as the epic poem Father of the Niben recounts. Brilliant, flightful creatures of glorious colours greeted them in Aldmeri language, making the Mer wonder, until they understood they were only calling back the word they were speaking without understanding it. Thankfully for both sides, this first contact was peaceful. The elves realized they had discovered a species of bird folk inhabiting the islands. Topal and his crew lived with the bird folk for a month, teaching them how to speak and to write. The birdmen soon hailed Topal as their lord, and pledged him their islands as a token of their allegiance. Soon, the elves departed the islands, promising to return. But after this, the birdmen disappear from the pages of history. Some scholars, such as Florin Jalil, believe that the feathered folk were wiped out by the early Khajiit who inhabited the wilds of Cyrodiil. But there is another possibility. If we examine Ayleid art and culture, we can see recurring references to birds and feathers. It could be possible that the Aldmer intermingled with the bird people of the islands, giving rise to a new culture, one that would eventually become the Ayleids. We will never know for sure whether the Ayleids were simply exiles from Somerset, or a hybrid between Aldmer and birdfolk. Yet in the last millennium of the Merethic era, the Ayleid culture would spread throughout Cyrodiil and beyond, quickly becoming the dominant power in the region. It's worth noting that the timeline here is murky. The exodus to Cyrodiil happened so long ago that we don't have exact dates, and few Ayleid sources from the period survive. So we are unsure exactly when or why the Ayleids chose to leave Somerset and settle the mainland. Indeed, there is one source that suggests this may not have been a choice freely made. One ancient Ayleid inscription gives some clue to the circumstances of this migration, reading, "Our exiled elven ancestors heard the welcoming gifts of peace in the streams and beech trees and stars." As we have discussed, the Aldmer culture of old was strict and hierarchical, with little room for dissent or deviation. It could be possible that the Ayleids were driven from Somerset due to religious differences, in particular, differing attitudes towards the Daedra. The early Ayleids were by no means unanimous in their veneration of the Daedra, and it seems the majority of them continued to worship the Aedric pantheon. But the Aldmer sapiarchs of Somerset had zero tolerance for difference, and it's likely that they made no distinction between the more benign Daedra, such as Azora or Meridia, and the more depraved princes. After all, the Aldmer were the children of Auriel, the embodiment of order, and many saw the princes of chaos as the ultimate anathema. Ultimately, this intolerance would only drive more Ayleids towards the embrace of the Daedra, and as their civilization developed, Daedra worship would become increasingly prevalent, with disastrous results. Although the Ayleids were known as great patrons of art and culture, relatively few of their works have survived over the centuries. In part, this was due to the zealotry of the Alessian order, which took power after the Ayleid downfall. The Pocket Guide to the Empire describes them as tireless in ferreting out and destroying elven writings during its long dominance. Perhaps only a dozen Ayleid texts survived this cultural destruction, the most important of them being the Anuad, which contains the Ayleid origin myth. It describes the creation of the world as follows. The first ones were brothers, Anu and Padme. They came into the void, and time began. As Anu and Padme wandered the void, the interplay of light and darkness created Nia. Both Anu and Padme were amazed and delighted with her appearance, but she loved Anu, and Padme retreated from them in bitterness. Nia became pregnant, but before she gave birth, Padme returned, professing his love for Nia. She told him that she loved only Anu, and Padme beat her in rage. Anu returned, fought Padme and cast him outside time. Nia gave birth to creation, but died from her injuries soon after. Anu, grieving, hid himself in the sun and slept. The myth goes on to claim that Padme's blood became the Daedra, the blood of Anu formed the stars, and their mingled blood gave rise to the Aedra. While others see the Daedra as solely Padmaic and the Aedra as solely Anuic, the Ayleids see the Aedra and Daedra as sharing common blood. To them, order and chaos were not mutually exclusive. Both are necessary, and achieving enlightenment involves finding a delicate equilibrium between the two. It is this philosophy which explains why the Ayleids worshipped both Daedra and Aedra throughout their history. Curiously, the Ayleid origin myth also describes 12 worlds of creation, which were all destroyed during the dawn, with the sole exception of Nirn. These deviations have led to the Anuad being described as heretical by other cultures, but this origin myth reinforces a central tenet of Ayleid belief, that the Aedra and Daedra are not so different after all, and that the Ayleids themselves are the inheritors of the legacy of both Anu and Padme, children of the stars and of the earth. During the Merethic era, the Ayleids built a grand civilization in the heartland of Cyrodiil, one that echoed the grandeur of their lost homeland. But this was far from a pale imitation. It was vibrant, dynamic, and the Ayleids were not afraid to stray from the footsteps of their ancestors. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of this culture was their architecture. Indeed, the ruins of their cities and temples are still a common sight in Cyrodiil even today. They crafted their cities from a distinctive white stone which has remained untarnished throughout the ages, adorning it with patterns of the stars they worshipped. These cities towered above ground and descended far below it, creating sprawling labyrinths of unimaginable complexity, constructed with an architectural mastery that blended deep arcane knowledge with an appreciation of art and aesthetics. Many of these cities contained hidden wonders which their creators jealously guarded. They built traps and defenses to guard their secrets, and it's a testament to the Ayleids' ingenuity that many of these are still functioning even today. Any tomb robber who delves into an Ayleid ruin must be prepared to face swinging blades, collapsing floors above pits of spikes, or even vents that release noxious fumes, all designed to keep intruders at bay. Still, this hasn't prevented many ruins becoming dens for criminals, or even havens for necromancers and Daedric cults, who look to the past glories of the Ayleids for dark inspiration. In the Ayleid Golden Age, the names of these cities became synonymous with wealth and sophistication. Miskarsand, the keeper of the Great Stone, the Lake Mist city of Vilverin, Seatatar, the shadow of the Fatherwood, the High Fane of Maladar. They were all mighty in their own right, but none were as breathtaking as the great wonder the Ayleids built in the centre of Lake Rumer. Here, they raised a great spire as an echo of Adamantia, the first tower, where Auriel presided over the convention at the dawn of time. This new tower was known to the Ayleids as the Temple of the Ancestors, but it is renowned today by another name, the White Gold Tower. Here, the Ayleids kept the 10 ancestors, statues of meteoric glass, each forged through impeccable craftsmanship, and constituting some of the finest surviving examples of Ayleid art. The Temple of the Ancestors was the heart of the Ayleid Empire, an independent city-state which answered to no one, and the spiritual centre of their culture. Yet some whisper that it is far more than a simple palace or temple. Like the other metaphysical towers of Tamriel, such as Adamantia or the Throat of the World, it serves as a pillar that holds up the mortal plane. If these towers were to fall, it could result in the entire reality of Mundus collapsing. But the power of the White Gold Tower can also be harnessed for other ends, with potentially disastrous results. The controversial scholar Nu Hatter describes its purpose as follows. Like all of the polydox constructs of the early Aldmer, whatever their abnegorbic creed, White Gold Tower is a conduit of creation, built to bring about a reversal of the congealing spirit bleed caused by the convention. In other words, it was a focus point for re-reaching the divine. At times, the tower's metaphysical power has been used for nefarious ends. In the late First Era, a group of Alessian Order zealots known as the Marakati Selectives sought to use the tower to sunder the dragon god of time. This resulted in time itself shattering, an event known as a dragon break. This dragon break, which has been remembered as the Middle Dawn, plunged Tamriel into a mire of overlapping timelines and contradictory events which would last for over 1,000 years. People spoke sideways, and children gave birth to their own parents. Some say Cyrodiil rose to become an empire across the stars, others that it was shrunk down inside an egg. Ultimately, the Dragon Break was a testament to the power held within the White Gold Tower, a power that was first harnessed by the Ayleids. And when they eventually lost the tower, their hold over Cyrodiil would break for good. Though the Ayleid civilization was the first state in Tamriel that could truly be called an empire, it wasn't an empire in the way the word is commonly understood. There was no emperor, no singular authority at its centre. Instead, it was formed from a network of city-states, each ruled by its own sorcerer king. The scholar Herminius Cinna describes their system of government as thus: "My own research into the late Ayleid period suggests there was not a single Ayleid ruler, but many. They were a bitterly divided people, with many warlords vying against each other for power. However, in times of crisis, the Ayleid lords were known to put aside their differences and choose one among them to become their liege. The most famous example is the infamous sorcerer king, Umaril the Unfeathered, the nemesis of Pelennor Whitestrake. Yet despite their political division, the Ayleids were still a formidable power, and their influence spread across not just Cyrodiil, but the whole of central Tamriel. Their possession of the Heartland allowed them to become a political and cultural hegemon, and never before in history had so much power been concentrated in the hands of one people. This period of history is known as the Merethic Era for a reason. It marked the high watermark of elven power in Tamriel. The Aldmer in Somerset, the Bosmer in Valenwood, the Chimer in Morrowind, the Snow Elves in Skyrim. The Ayleid Empire stood above them all, securing elven dominion over the continent. One factor that allowed the Ayleids to flourish so far and wide was their command of magic. The Ayleids' mastery of the arcane was unparalleled in their time, and it allowed their culture to reach new heights of complexity. Of all the cultures in Tamrielic history, their sophistication could be rivaled only by the Dwemer. Erlaf Jarl, author of Magic from the Sky, describes the Ayleids' relation to magic in the following terms. The ancient Ayleids believed that Nirn was composed of 4 basic elements: earth, water, air, and light. And of these 4 elements, they believed the most sublime form of light was starlight. The stars are our links to the plane of Aetherius, the source of all magical power, and therefore light from the stars is the most potent and exalted of all magical powers. This star magic, also known as Valiance, was among the most sophisticated magical arts developed by any culture in Tamriel, before or since. The Ayleids used it to work great wonders, crafting powerful artifacts using fragments of Aetherius that have fallen to Nirn as meteoric glass. These enchanted items were central to their magical prowess, allowing them to store, harness, and manipulate magical energy in ways still not fully understood by modern scholars. Welkin stones, or sky stones, acted as magical batteries, instantly replenishing the magical reserves of their users. Thala stones, rarer and more valuable, could restore magical energy to enchanted items, and are still sought after by adventurers who explore the ancient ruins of Cyrodiil. Ayleid wells, scattered across the landscape, served as reservoirs of magicka for passing mages, and they're still as potent today as they were in ancient times. However, All of these magical innovations pale in comparison to the greatest achievement of the Ayleids, the Nexus Gates. These gates allowed for instant teleportation, even between different planes of reality. They were linked together in networks, connected by a central hub constructed in the void between planes. The most famous of these hubs was constructed by the Ayleids of Blackmarsh and was known as Ayleid Empire, or the Golden Path. This unparalleled marvel was a testament to the magical sophistication of its creators. Yet, like all the wonders of the Ayleids, it would eventually crumble into ruin. As the Ayleid cities in Tamriel fell one by one, their Nexus gates would be deactivated, leaving the realm connecting them abandoned. It seems likely that whole networks were lost as their gates were destroyed, their remnants forever adrift in the void. Today, most have forgotten that such technology ever existed, and no known explorers have ventured through the gates since the mid-Second Era. But was the deactivation of the Nexus gates a result of outside aggression, or a conscious choice by the Ayleids? After all, the Nexus gates would provide the perfect refuge from invaders. We are left to wonder if, somewhere out there in the void, Ayleid remnants linger between the planes, preserving a remnant of their culture far beyond the reach of the other mortal races. Despite the Ayleids' unparalleled knowledge of magic, there was one enigma that continued to elude their understanding: the Elder Scrolls themselves. The scrolls are one of the great mysteries of the Orbis. Written in a strange script of unknown origin, they codify events past, present, and future. The scrolls are said to originate from outside of time and space. They both exist and do not exist at the same time. But they are no mere artifacts. They have a mind of their own and are able to appear and disappear at will. All this has led the Moth priests to conclude that the power of the scrolls exceeds even the gods themselves, both Adric and Daedric alike. Yet their knowledge comes at a price. Those who read the Elder Scrolls risk losing both their sight and sanity. The scrolls were irresistible to the Ayleids, who valued the power of knowledge above all else. Bara, Aegea, Raiso Karan, wear lore as your armour, as the ancient Ayleidun proverb goes. Yet for the Ayleids, lore was not only armour, but a weapon, and in the Elder Scrolls they saw the potential for the ultimate weapon. But they were well aware of the dangers that reading the scrolls could bring. So instead of risking themselves, the Ayleids placed the burden on the shoulders of their Nedic slaves. They brought them in shackles to the White Gold Tower, where the scrolls were kept, and forced them to risk their minds in pursuit of elder knowledge. One ancient Moth priest account recorded the experience of these captive needs. Chains defined us, binding us, constraining us. We looked up from our chains to the tower that stood proud, defiant, above us all. Built by us, bricks fit by us, but not for us. For our masters, atop their stone. Within the tower, they had secrets beyond counting. Most beyond us, most withheld from us. But in some few small chambers, we came to be the masters of a world without light. Our masters gathered the great scrolls, grew the twisted trees, tended the moths with eyes upon their wings, and so learned great secrets, learned how to master the world. Through the process of reading the scrolls, these Nedic slaves were robbed of their vision, with many even losing their minds entirely. But a few managed to endure, and learned how to tend to the moths in the trees. They took larvae from the insects and clippings from the trees, and founded their own secret glades, where they could study the secrets of the scrolls in peace. This was the birth of the cult of the Ancestor Moth, and to this day they are the keepers of the scrolls and their secrets. Yet we are left to ponder, what ancient secrets did the Ayleids learn from the scrolls? How much of their power was derived from this elder knowledge? Unfortunately, this is another question to which there is no easy answer. But at least one thing is clear. Few cultures, before or since, have delved so deep into the prophecies of the scrolls, and perhaps no other had such a deep understanding of their hidden truths. As we have already touched upon, Ayleid religion was notable for its toleration of Daedra worship. This is what set them apart from their Ultima ancestors, who venerated Auriel and the Aedric pantheon, scorning any who consorted with the Lords of Oblivion. It's hard to make sweeping statements about Ayleid religion, as it was remarkably diverse. It seems as if each Ayleid city had its own patron god, whether Aedric or Daedric. At first, worship of the Aedra was more common, but as the First Era dawned, the elves of the Heartland increasingly turned towards the Daedric princes. Mortals are drawn to the Daedra for many reasons, and the Ayleids were no different. Promises of power, pleasure, and forbidden knowledge drew them in increasing numbers towards the altars of the Lords of Oblivion. It's probable that all Daedric princes had their own cults among their Ayleids, but a handful of them seemed to stand above the rest. Perhaps the most important of them was Meridia, whom the Ayleids knew as Merid Nunda. She was seen as the personification of light, the element which the Ayleids held in highest esteem, and they praised her as the Bright One and the bringer of light. On the Gold Coast, the grand city of Garlas Malatar was built in her honour. Under her protection, the city flourished under its ruler, King Narilmor, becoming the Pearl of the West. Yet while many flocked to Meridia's light, others were drawn to princes of darkness. The great city of Varsa Balim was raised in honour of the Prince of Destruction, Mehrunes Dagon, and said to hide the prince's razor deep within its labyrinths. Molag Bal, the Prince of Domination, offered his followers power in the form of undead minions, and King Anumeril of Abergalas fell under his thrall. Elsewhere, the grand city of Urokai was corrupted by the influence of Mephala the Webspinner, becoming the Doom Crag, a fortress of death which claimed the lives of all who entered. And under the leadership of High Priest Alessian, many Ayleid sages came together to pledge allegiance to Hermaeus Mora, the Prince of Forbidden Knowledge, who they hailed as the Golden Eye. Calling themselves the Primeval Seekers, the cultists overthrew the monarchy of Biznensel and used eldritch magic to shield the city from the outside world, turning it into a secret bastion of forbidden knowledge. Yet unlike cultures such as the Dunmer, who built a unified faith dedicated to veneration of the Daedra, the proliferation of Daedric cults only served to divide the Ayleids, turning king against king, city against city. No event demonstrates this more than the war between the city-states of Deladil and Abergalas. Meridia was the patron of Deladil, the City of Light, which was renowned as a haven of scholars and artists. But the city would eventually come into conflict with the nearby city of Abergalas, which was populated by warlike cultists of Molag Bal, the Prince of Domination. The king of Abergalas, Anumeril, envied the great cathedral the citizens of Deladil had made for their patron, and so he resolved to build an even greater temple in praise of Molag Bal. But the Ayleids of Abergalas were warriors, not craftsmen, and so the temple they constructed was little more than a twisted mockery. The citizens of Deladil were unconcerned by this gesture, not caring to measure their piety in stone and mortar. The king of Abergalas would grow enraged at this indifference, as the text The Withering of Deladil recounts. And this unconcern of the Deladils ate a hole into the heart of the king of Abergalas, and he was vexed unto madness. He sent soldiers to profane the small shrine to Merid Nunda in Abergalas, and then went to his vast shrine to Molag Gabal, where he swore a mighty oath. And slaying a family of visiting Deladils on the altar, the king vowed that he would gather his army, march across the valley, and capture all the Deladils, sacrificing them to Molag Gabal within the Chapel of Lights. To destroy Deladil, the king of Abergalas planned to use a Daedric artifact known as the Mortum Vivicus, a powerful weapon created by Molag Bal, capable of draining all life from the city's inhabitants and turning them into undead thralls. But Meridia warned her people of the looming threat, and a small group of warriors known as the Knights of the Gleaming Blade left Deladil in a quest to destroy the weapon. When the king's army arrived at the gates of Deladil, they found the city had simply vanished. What happened to it is not known, but it is widely believed that Meridia intervened to conceal it, and thereby shield it from harm. Some believe that Deladil became the hollow city in the plain of Cold Harbour, placed there by Meridia to mock Molag Bal, a taunting reminder of his own impotence within his realm. Regardless, with no one left to fight, King Animaril was forced to return home in shame. But there too, he would find only desolation. As the Knights of Deladil had fought their way into the city in their attempt to destroy the Mortem Vivicus, Abergalas had been levelled to the ground. Some believe that the Mortem Vivicus backfired on the citizens of Abergalas, with others claiming that Meridia herself intervened to bathe the city in radiant fire. Thus, two of the greatest cities of the Ayleids were lost due to religious conflict. As their worship of the Aedra grew stronger, the Ayleids were becoming more and more divided, the already tenuous bonds between their city-states slowly beginning to fracture. As the Ayleids strayed further and further into Daedra worship, they increasingly lost their grip on any sense of morality. Their human slaves became the outlets for their darkest desires, and they began to use them as subjects in cruel experiments, or simply to torment them for pleasure. The horror of this is outlined in the text known as the Adabala. Men were given over to the lifting of stones, and the draining of the fields, and the upkeep of temple and road, or to become art tortures for strange pleasures, as in the wailing wheels of Vindicel and the gut gardens of Circon, and flesh sculpture, which was everywhere among the slaves of the Ayleids in those days, or worse, the realms of the Fire King Hadhul, where children were set aflame for nighttime tiger sport. But for the Daedra-worshipping Ayleids, this cruelty was more than simply an outlet for anger or hate, beyond even the pursuit of dark pleasure. These horrors were spiritual in nature. The Ayleids were drawing inspiration from the demon lords of Oblivion, trying to imitate their power to create their own realms of chaos on Tamriel. Those who indulged in this art torture often worshipped the Daedric Prince Sanguine, who they revered as blood-made pleasure. In the pursuit of perfection, no pain was too agonizing, no torture was too cruel, and no victim would be spared, no matter how innocent. The true horror of the Ayleid art tortures is laid bare in the accounts of Eldhal the Inducer, who recorded his experiments on living human subjects. It was a subject yearning for ascent to the ultimate purpose of its form. A vision of the shape and the method took me immediately, and I stilled the form. I stopped its sight and speech and stood it in the working space. I ordered the servants to stay and bear witness to a perfect example, and began the dedication rituals. And to it I sang and hummed and whispered. The cage of its heart gave assent, and unfurled with no splintering, no cracking, the life's rhythm persisting. I ordered fine silver chains. Into each link I inscribed the 100 words for bliss, and I wrapped the cage and trunk all round to best display the organ at work. These morbid tales of flesh sculpture and art torture remain infamous among the people of Cyrodiil to this day, and any achievements of Ayleid culture will always be tainted by the rampant sadism which was allowed to spread unchecked. It's been suggested by some that the stories of Ayleid cruelty may have been exaggerated, that they are propaganda dreamed up by imperial scholars to help legitimize the Alessian regime. But here we have an account written by the Ayleids themselves, which takes pride in the horrific act of peeling apart a living person and displaying their mutilated organs as an art form. Although not all Ayleids took part in such horrors, and some even openly opposed them, they were hardly a secret. Indeed, by the time Ayleid power reached its zenith, such horrors as the gut gardens of Circon were famous across their domain. The brutalization and torture of humans wasn't simply an isolated atrocity. It had become the pillar on which Ayleid power had been built. And when that pillar came crashing down, it would ultimately result in the collapse of their entire civilization. As religious divides became entrenched, tensions within the Ayleid Empire would reach a breaking point. Soon, the Daedra worshippers began to amass armies, bolstered by minions summoned from the plains of oblivion. Under the command of King Glinferin of Atatar, they marched against their Aedra-worshipping brethren, causing the outbreak of a brutal civil war. This conflict, known as the Narfinsel Schism, marked the death knell of the Ayleid Golden Age. Brother turned against brother, and never again would the elves of the Heartland be united in common cause. The civil war reached its climax in 1E198 at the city of Wendelbeck, where the Aedra worshippers made a futile last stand. The Daedra worshippers soon stormed the city and massacred its defenders, an atrocity which has gone down in history as the Scouring of Wendelbeck. This ended all organised resistance to Daedra worship in Cyrodiil, and the surviving Aedra worshippers had no choice but to flee. Many of them scattered into Blackmarsh, founding the Bar-Sayabic Ayleid culture among the swamps. The Ayleids of the Marsh would continue to follow the Aedric faith of their ancestors, but had little contact with the heartland of Cyrodiil. Although the Daedra worshippers may have won their civil war, the atrocities they committed against their brethren left deep scars that would never truly heal. Nor was this the only civil conflict to shake the Ayleid dominion during this time. Early in the First Era, the Sorcerer King, Celemeril the Lightbringer, amassed an army of undead minions and launched a deadly campaign of conquest across Tamriel. But some Ayleid kings opposed Celemeril, recognizing that the great sorcerer had fallen into madness and fearing his ambitions might bring the entire continent to ruin. Led by Celemeril's brother, Valentis, a coalition of Ayleid lords soon took up arms against the Necromancer King. Using the power of an Elder Scroll, Valentis sealed away his brother and obliterated his name from the annals of history. This period of civil war would shake the Ayleid Empire to its core, weakening it just as it was about to face the most serious challenge in its history. The doom of the Ayleids would not be decided by gods or kings. Indeed, the architect of their fall came from the lowliest origins imaginable. In the heartland of the Ayleid Empire, among the bloody grasslands of Sardavar Lead, a slave was born among a tribe whose name is long forgotten. This was a cruel place, where humans of all kinds were herded from across Tamriel to be bred like cattle. They had no freedom, not even the freedom to keep families, and were tortured and slaughtered at the leisure of their captors. From this hell, one woman would rise like a phoenix. She has been known by many names, Perif, Al-Esh, the Paravant, but she has gone down in history as Alessia, the first empress of humankind. Seeing the plight of her people, Alessia prayed to the divines for deliverance. And at the holy mountain of Sanctuary, her prayers were answered, as Akatosh himself appeared before her in a vision. Akatosh, looking with pity upon the plight of men, drew precious blood from his own heart, and blessed Saint Alessia with this blood of dragons, and made a covenant. So long as Alessia's generations were true to the dragon blood, Akatosh would endeavour to seal tight the gates of oblivion, and deny the armies of Daedra and undead to their enemies, the Daedra-loving Ayleids. At first, the Ayleids dismissed this upstart rebellion, scorning its leader as the cattle queen. But in their arrogance, they failed to take the threat seriously, and soon, the rebels' ranks would be bolstered by two of the most formidable warriors to ever walk Tamriel. The first was the winged bull Morahouse, demigod son of Kain, who would become Alessia's lover and consort. The second warrior was even more mysterious. Some believe he was just a man, but others say he was the missing god reborn, come to take revenge against the children of his enemy. He has been known by many names, but the elves feared him as Pelin-El, the star-made knight, and his arrival would spell their destruction. The epic tale, the Song of Pelennor, recounts the moment he joined Alessia's rebellion. And Pelennor came to Perif's camp of rebels, holding a sword and mace, both encrusted with the smashed viscera of elven faces, feathers, and magic beads, which were the markings of the Ayleid, stuck to the redness that hung from his weapons, and he lifted them, saying, these were their eastern chieftains, no longer full of their talking. Together, Alessia, Morrowhouse, and Pelennor would become the triumvirate that would raise the men of Cyrodiil out of suffering and servitude, and bring the empire of their oppressors crashing down to rubble. One by one, they defeated the Ayleid kings of the Heartland, breaking the chains of every human held in captivity. And with every victory, their ranks swelled, as freedmen took up arms alongside them. Pelennor called out many Ayleid kings to single combat. He struck down the Fire King Hadhul on the steps of Sayatatar. He crushed Gortauer the Shaper's head to a pulp on the altar of Ninindava. He tore out Haramir's neck with his teeth while roaring the name of Remen, who would not be born for another 2,000 years. But Pellennor's might was also tainted by madness, as the Song of Pelennor recounts. When Huna, whom Pelennor had raised from grain-slave to hoplite and loved well, took death from an arrowhead made from the beak of Selethalel the Singer, the Whitestrake went on his first madness. He wrought destruction from Narlamay all the way to Seladil, and erased those lands from the maps of elves and men, and all things in them, and Perif was forced to make sacrifice to the gods to keep them from leaving the world in their disgust. So much time has passed that we will never truly understand the nature of Pelennor Whitestrake, or his madness. Upon seeing him, the Nords claimed that he was sure reborn, but he only spat at their feet in reply, and scolded them for their blasphemy. Some claimed that under his armour there was no man at all, merely a construct with a red diamond in place of a heart, whose facets could unsector and form into a man. Whatever the truth, one thing is undeniable. He was the bane of all elven kind, and he would not rest as long as a single one of them drew breath. Having failed to take the rebellion seriously, the Ayleids soon found themselves assailed on all fronts. Soon, the Nords of Skyrim marched south to support Alessia's revolt, and the rebels were even joined by Aedra-worshipping Ayleid lords, whose beliefs had been oppressed by their Daedra-worshipping kin. Yet there was one among the Ayleids who was feared above all, and the remaining elven lords of the Heartland soon rallied around his banner. His name was Umaril, known as the Accursed, the Unfeathered, the Dread Castellan. Legend claims his mother was an Ayleid, but that his father was a god, a forgotten deity from an extinct Kalpa. He was a powerful sorcerer and a formidable war leader, and he became the first Ayleid to openly challenge Pelennor, calling out the star-made knight to face him in single combat. He gathered his forces at the White Gold Tower, channeled his power, and waited for the decisive battle. Soon, the rebel armies converged on City Isle, encircling the greatest citadel of the Ayleids. The rebellion's leaders gathered in a grand council to debate how to proceed. The White Gold Tower was thought to be impregnable, and a frontal assault was surely doomed to fail. Alessia herself counselled caution, but Pelennor flew into a rage and labelled his comrades as cowards. He took off on his own, heading to the tower to answer Umaril's challenge. But Umaril had been hoarding magical strength in preparation for this duel, and harried Pelennor from afar, sending wave after wave of soldiers against him, their weapons glowing with valiance. Empowered by Umaril's enchantments, they were able to pierce the Whitestrake's armour, and by the time he reached the tower, he was already bleeding from a dozen wounds. Then, Umaril appeared before Pelennor, wreathed in the light of Meridia, glowing with divine power. The two warriors clashed in a battle which shook the earth, before Pelennor caved in Umaril's helmet with his mace and hacked off his unfeathered wings with his blade. Yet although Umaril was defeated, Pellennor's strength was all but spent, and the death of their liege lord sent the remaining Ayleid kings into a frenzy. They fell upon the wounded Pelennor with their weapons, carving his body into 8 pieces, and his roars of pain and anger were so great that even the besieging army outside the walls could hear. Morahau soon led an assault against the tower, using his horned head as a battering ram to smash down the gates and allow the Alessian legions to pour through. The Ayleids had already been devastated by Pellennor's rampage, and as the besiegers broke through, the remaining defenders turned to flee. Soon, the holiest site of the Ayleids would be bathed in rivers of their blood. At the base of the tower, Morahau discovered what was left of Pelennor, but the white strake's severed head still clung to life and used its last breath to deliver a grave warning. Beware, Morahau, beware. With the foresight of death, I know now that my foe yet lives, bitter knowledge to take to my grave. Better that I had died believing myself the victor. Although cast beyond the doors of night, he will return. Be vigilant. I can no longer shield the host of men from Umaril's retribution. With this, Pelennor Whitestrake passed into the pages of history, then into the whispers of legend. Yet he was no mere man, and death could not take him so easily. It is said that despite his apparent demise, he would be at Alessia's bedside many years later as she took her final breath. While the truth of his nature may remain elusive, he still had his part to play, and even in death, his crusade against the Ayleids was far from over. Though the fall of the White Gold Tower in 1E243 is typically seen as the end of the Elven Dominion in Cyrodiil, it was far from the end of Ayleid civilization. For more than 2 centuries, Ayleid cities would remain dotted throughout the wilds of the Heartland. There was intermittent warfare between the new human empire and the Ayleid states, such as in the region now known as Bravil, which withstood 4 human invasions before finally falling. But it seems that a number of the Aedra-worshipping Ayleid lords were actually vassals of the First Empire, and lived along humanity in relative peace. In fact, it appears this upstart empire was rather multi-ethnic. Though the First Empire is remembered as largely Nedic, the text, the Adabala, lists many other tribes of men who made up its denizens. Cothri, men of Creth, Keptu, men of Gi, Al-Hared, and men of Ket. It's possible that as well as these human tribes, the early Alessian Empire accepted Aedra-worshipping Ayleids as its subjects. After all, many of them did fight side by side with humans during Alessia's rebellion. But if there was a period of harmony between the men of Cyrodiil and the Aedra-worshipping Ayleids, it didn't last for long. For less than a century after the establishment of the First Empire, a new religious movement would sweep over Cyrodiil, and ultimately, it would spell the doom of the last remnants of the Heartland High Elves. This religious revolution was instigated by one of the most unlikely figures imaginable, Maruk, a member of the ape-like Imgur race. After a century of self-imposed seclusion, this hermit was supposedly visited by the spirit of Saint Alessia, who spoke to him of hidden truths. This encounter is detailed in the text, the illusion of death. And ever did the shade of Alesh speak to him, serrated words that rasped his concept organ and brought him to wisdom through affliction. And he recorded her words in his simian gore with glyphs on the beseeching scarp, and the fire in his blood did etch the lithic face with the 77 inflexible doctrines. These doctrines would lay the foundation of a new religious movement, the Alessian Order. This new theology claimed that all existing gods were simply aspects of a single supreme deity, a being known as the One. They believed this supreme spirit to be embodied by Akatosh, the dragon god of time. But a sect of radicals among the Order, known as the Marakati Selectives, believed that the purity of Akatosh had been corrupted by elven influence. Their manifesto even claimed that the purpose of proper life is the expungement of the Aldmeri taint. The ranks of the Order were soon swelled by those humans who resented the power and wealth of the remaining elven lords in Cyrodiil. In the early 300s, there was a spate of attacks against Ayleid settlements, and a number of their cities were burned and looted by Alessian fanatics. Then, in the year 361, the Alessian Order seized control of the empire and began to enforce its doctrines as the official state religion. The Ayleid lordships were officially abolished. Now, there was nothing to restrain the Order's fanaticism, and they began to turn their wrath against the last remaining Ayleid holdouts. The text, The Cleansing of the Fane, recounts the Alessian Order's attack on the Ayleid Temple of Maladar. And then Abbot Cosmas gathered all the brothers and led them to Maladar, also known as the High Fane in the Elvish tongue, and came against it with holy fire, and the foul demons were destroyed, and many devilish relics and books found therein were burned, and the land had peace for many years. As the Alessian Order tightened its hold over Cyrodiil, brutal pogroms against the elves became commonplace. The historian Herminius Cinna recounts that, by this point, the balance of power was so overwhelmingly against them, and their fate so long foreshadowed, that most of the remaining Ayleids simply left Cyrodiil. Many chose to flee into the neighbouring provinces of High Rock and Valenwood in hopes of refuge. But still, one last Ayleid kingdom clung on in the heartland, the city of Nenalata, on the banks of the great Niben River. Its king, Lalorian Dinar, bent the knee to the Alessian Order in the hopes that his people would be spared. But ultimately, the zealotry of the Order could not be held back by mere diplomacy. The Empire soon delivered an ultimatum to the elves of Nenalata: leave Cyrodiil peacefully and never return, or stay and be slaughtered. A great debate raged among the people of Nenalata. Some wanted to accept the terms and try to forge a new life elsewhere, but others were determined to stand and fight. But King Dinar knew that war could only end one way. Reluctantly, he accepted the terms of the ultimatum and led his people in an exodus out of Cyrodiil. But some refused to leave. When the Alessians fell upon Nenalata, these last holdouts were slaughtered without mercy, and with them died all hopes of an Ayleid restoration in the heartland. Yet although the loss of Cyrodiil broke the power of the Ayleids, it was not the end of their culture. Whole clans of Ayleids fled into the provinces, hoping to build new homes and reverse the decline of their people. King Dinar of Nenalata led his people in a great migration out of Cyrodiil, and after a long and arduous march, they finally arrived in High Rock, where they were welcomed by the Dureni elves. On the shores of Halcyon Lake, they founded a new city, Biznensel, which was built in imitation of their lost home. King Dinar became a close ally of the Dureni, and when the Alessian Order's armies marched against High Rock, he fought alongside the Dureni against his old enemy. At the Battle of Glenumbria Moors, the combined forces of the Dureni, Dinar, and the Nords broke the back of the Alessian Order, and this defeat put an end to their ambitions of spreading their theocracy across Tamriel. Yet this victory came at a terrible price. The Dureni suffered heavy casualties repelling the invaders, weakening their grip over High Rock. Soon, their power would be eclipsed by the upstart Breton kingdoms, and yet another land would slip from the grip of elven rule. At the same time, the last king of the Ayleids would once again become an exile, driven from his new city by the machinations of a Daedric cult dedicated to Hermaeus Mora. Cast out once more, he would be lured back to his home of Nenalata. But this turned out to be a trap laid by the Prince of Domination, Molag Bal. King Dinar was taken and imprisoned in Baal's hellish plain of Cold Harbour, where he would remain captive for the next 3,000 years. While the Ayleid civilization clung on for a time in High Rock, it faced mounting challenges elsewhere. In Blackmarsh, the Barsaebic Ayleids had refused to help their brethren as they were scoured from Cyrodiil, no doubt revenge for their own exile from the Heartland, merely half a century before. The Barsaebics built their own thriving civilization among the swamps, raising architectural marvels such as Silyanorn, which lies beneath the modern city of Stormhold. But this was no peaceful expansion, and the Fen Lords of the March inevitably came into conflict with the native lizard folk of the swamps. They captured Argonians for forced labour, and prized their scaled skin for use in their flesh sculptures, and it is said that the twisted designs of the Blackmarsh Ayleids even rivaled the wailing wheels of Vindicel in their cruelty. But like their cousins in Cyrodiil, the Ayleids of the Marsh would soon fade from history, their ruins swallowed up by the swamps that they had failed to tame. Perhaps the most successful of the Ayleid exiles were those who fled south into the forests of Valenwood. The Bosmer welcomed their Ayleid cousins with open arms. At least 5 Ayleid clans, including those of Vilverin, escaped to Valenwood largely intact. Here, among the trees, the Ayleids raised cities in echo of those they had lost. Late into the Second Era, ruins of these cities were still visible, their white stone jutting from the undergrowth. Many of them, such as the Ossuary of Telekar and the Reliquary of Stars, were known to hide powerful artifacts within their depths. Yet despite the brief resurgence of the Ayleids in Valenwood, their culture would not survive the ages. However, unlike in Cyrodiil, where their civilization met a violent end, the Ayleid remnants in Valenwood would flicker out with a whimper. The scholar Quainar of Cloudrest has speculated as to the causes of this decline. Their new hosts, the Bosmer, were remarkably generous in welcoming the Ayleids into their realm, so long as the Heartland High Elves agreed to adopt aspects of the Green Pact and refrain from harming the forest. Having little choice, the Ayleids agreed, and this probably contributed to the dilution of their culture. For diluted it was, absorbed over time, and eventually forgotten. I have walked the great Ayleid ruins of Valenwood, Hectorheim, Rolanyiel's Fall, Bellarata, Lealoria, and a dozen more, and none of them, not one, was still occupied only 2,000 years after the diaspora. For some reason, once the Ayleids were under the Great Grat Oaks, they, and their distinctive culture, simply melted away. The author also discusses an alternative theory regarding the Valenwood Ayleids' decline. He ponders an idea presented by another scholar, Gelgarad the Velaspid, named the Theorem of Disinheritance. In simple terms, this is the idea that, over time, the Valenwood Ayleids became unable to breed with one another, and could only reproduce with local Bosmer. Over time, this gradually led to the Ayleid survivors becoming absorbed into the dominant Bosmer culture. Whether the Ayleids of the Gratwood were gradually assimilated, or simply died out over time, the result was the same. Their stone cities were gradually abandoned, and left to be reclaimed by the trees. As the years passed, the grandeur of the Ayleids was gradually forgotten, and their name began to pass into myth. Like the Dwemer and the Snow Elves before them, they became just another fallen giant in the graveyard of history. Yet a few individuals managed to outlast the fall of their civilization. The scholar Tuorhain Fyra lived well into the Second Era, and helped to found the University of Gwilym, ensuring that at least some of his people's intellectual tradition survived. King Dinar would be freed from Cold Harbour during the crisis of the Plain Melt, and gave his life to help defeat Molag Bal's plan to destroy Tamriel. Some Ayleid sorcerers would turn to dark arts to ensure their survival, becoming undead liches haunting the ruins of their fallen cities. But as the years passed, they too faded into obscurity. Still, rumours persisted of tribes of wild elves who endured in the remote forests of Cyrodiil, far from the eyes of the world. Yet by the late Third Era, the last reported sightings of these tribes were well over 1,000 years old, and it seems likely that they too have gradually withered away. By the Fourth Era, and the fall of the Septim Empire, the Ayleids were well and truly gone. Among the Imperials, their name was a byword for tyranny and decadence, the ruins of their cities a warning to the dangers of hubris and excess. But the elves of Tamriel remembered them differently, hailing their art and architecture as the pinnacle of sophistication. And though the Ayleids were mostly a curiosity for scholars and historians, there were some who wished to reclaim their lost power. The Ayleid revivalists first emerged during the Second Era. Led by Nantharion Rain, the first revivalists were Bosmer out of Valenwood, who could trace back their ancestry to Ayleid exiles from Cyrodiil. They founded a new settlement in the West Weald named Vashabar, constructed atop the ruins of the ancient city of Miskarsund. Nantharion was secretly a worshipper of the lost Daedric prince Ithelia, and hoped to use her power to carve out a revived Ayleid kingdom in the West Weald. But Nantharion was slain before he could fulfill his ambition, and the cause of the Ayleid revivalists seemingly died with him. Nevertheless, rumours of secretive Ayleid cults endured well into the Third Era, though by this time they seemed to have been isolated to paranoid conspiracy theorists. But there was at least one man who continued to yearn for their revival. His name was Umbercano, a wealthy Altmer who had a fascination with the Ayleids that bordered on obsession. He was a known collector of Ayleid relics, and employed an unknown hero to recover the ancient statues known as the Ten Ancestors, and to retrieve an inscription from the ruins of the High Thane at Malada. But his ambitions were greater than simply collecting, for he would reveal to the hero that he sought the crown of Nenalata, the last Ayleid kingdom in Cyrodiil. As he used the inscription to open the sealed throne room of Nenalata, he would finally reveal his mad ambition.
Here it is, the throne of the last king of the Ayleids, and so it falls to me to begin the restoration of our ancient glory. Of Suna Tamriel, Octavoy, and Apen Aran Malaboro!
It's not known exactly what happened in that ancient throne room, but whatever the outcome, Umbercano's reign would be short-lived. He met his end down there in the dark, the would-be king of a realm that would never rise again. The deeds of these revivalists would go largely unremarked by the people of Tamriel. Yet in the dying days of the Third Era, the Ayleids would enter the pages of history once again. In the city of Anvil, the great chapel of Dibella was ransacked by mysterious assailants, its priests murdered, and its altars desecrated. Outside the chapel, an unknown prophet began to preach, portending the attack as a sign of impending doom.
The gate, once open, cares not who passeth through. Our ancient enemy has returned from the deeps of time to exact his revenge upon the gods.
Umaril the Unfeathered, the great nemesis of Pelennor Whitestrake, had returned from beyond the doors of night, eager to wreak his revenge on the people of Cyrodiil. At his command, he had an army of Aurorans, powerful Daedric warriors gifted to him by his patron, Meridia. Yet this was no idle warning, for the prophet's words also came with a call to action, to walk the way of the pilgrim, to take up the Crusader's mantle, and bring the fight to Umaril. One nameless hero would answer this call to arms, earning the blessings of each of the gods by completing the pilgrimage of the Nine Divines. Upon receiving the final blessing of the Nine, the hero would be visited by an apparition of Pelennor Whitestrake himself.
Your prayers have woken me from my endless dream. Or perhaps you have entered my dream, and I still sleep. I think others have sometimes spoken to me. Others like you, but my memory is doubtful. Perhaps the others came after you. Your need must be great for the gods to allow us to speak. Has Umaril the Accursed found a way back? The foulest of a foul race, 1,000 curses upon his unholy name. I thought I'd won, but I should have known. The slave masters are a cunning breed. Umaril found a way to cheat death as I could not. If you would seek for my relics, I know little that can help you. All that has passed since my death is like mist that my mind cannot take hold of. My friends built a shrine upon the site of my death, where the elves tormented me in a final act of revenge. I can show you where it once stood. Perhaps it is there still. Fare thee well, Sir Knight. May the gods grant you to destroy Umaril utterly, as I failed to do.
Now, the hero's path was clear: to collect the relics of the Crusader, to reform the fallen order of the Knights of the Nine, and slay Umaril once and for all. But this was easier said than done, for the Order of the Knights had fallen into ruin long ago, and all the while, Umaril was rebuilding his strength, gathering an army of Aurorans under his command. First, the hero visited Pelinal's lost shrine beneath Lake Rumer and claimed the legendary helm of the Crusader. Then, they retrieved Pelinal's boots from the shrine of Kinnereth, the gauntlets of the Crusader from the chapel of Stendar, the mace of Zenithar from beneath Leowin's chapel, and the Crusader's shield from deep within Fort Bulwark. The crusading knight Sir Roderick discovered Pelinal's sword and greaves in Underpool Cave, but was set upon by the wraith of the fallen knight, Lord Beric Vlindrel. Though Sir Roderick was slain, his squire Lathon managed to escape with the greaves and deliver them to the hero at the Priory of the Nine. Then, the hero confronted the wraith of Lord Beric within Underpool Cave, claiming the sword of the Crusader and purging it of the wraith's corruption. Now, all of the Crusader's relics were in the hero's hands, but there was one more weapon they needed if they wished to defeat Umaril for good. Something that even Pelinal Whitestrake did not have: the blessing of a ninth divine. The prophet bestowed the blessing of Talos upon the hero, which would allow them to follow Umaril beyond the Veil of Death and kill him permanently in the realm of the spirit. Then, the hero led the Knights of the Nine in an assault on the ancient Ayleid city of Garlas Malatar, which Umaril had claimed as his own. After a fierce battle, the hero came face to face with the ancient Ayleid king. Empowered by the Crusader's relics, the hero struck down Umaril. But this was far from the end, for Umaril had the blood of a god in his veins and could not be so easily ended. The hero used the blessing of Talos to follow Umaril into the spirit plane, and with sword and mace, the hero finally put an end to the greatest king of the Ayleids. Umaril was destroyed in both body and spirit, the divine blood which had endured since the previous world river now spilling from his veins. And with him died the last hope of an Ayleid resurgence. At long last, the power of the Ayleids was truly broken. As the eras turned once more, the memory of the Ayleids faded even further into myth. Though their ruins still dotted the forests of Cyrodiil, the people of the Heartland had bigger concerns than the long-lost builders of crumbling monuments. For at the dawn of the Fourth Age, the Empire was fractured. The death of the Septim bloodline brought a period of chaos known as the Stormcrown Interregnum, and petty warlords squabbled over the right to the imperial throne. Yet beyond Cyrodiil, there were powers who still held a morbid fascination with the Heartland High Elves of old. The Altmer of the Somerset Isles have always been a proud people who viewed themselves as the inheritors of old Aldmaris. As elven dominance over the mainland waned and human empires rose in power, the Altmer stood tall on their island home. For centuries, they bowed to no one. But that all changed with the rise of Tiber Septim. For the first time, the Altmer had been truly conquered, and the Somerset Isles were home to garrisons of human soldiers. For many Altmer, this was the ultimate humiliation. And as the Septim Empire eventually fell into chaos, one extremist faction would seize power in Somerset. The Thalmor soon seceded from the empire, and as the power of Cyrodiil wavered, their influence only grew stronger. This would lead to the outbreak of the Great War, with the Thalmor even seizing the Imperial City before they were pushed back by the legions. This new Aldmeri dominion echoed the great elven civilizations of the past, and more than any other, it has come to resemble the Ayleid Empire of old. The parallels are stark. Both view elves as the master race, and other cultures as degenerate, and are willing to use brutality to enforce this hierarchy. It seems likely that the Thalmor are willing to invoke the legacy of the Ayleids to bring about a new Merethic era in Tamriel, to cast down the false human empires and restore the lost supremacy of elvenkind. Some members of the Thalmor have even embraced the most infamous legacy of the Ayleids, Daedra worship. Lord Narration, the Thalmor general who commanded the assault on the Imperial City, was a known cultist of Boethia, and even planned to sacrifice thousands of the city's inhabitants in a ritual known as the Culling. Though his mad plan was stopped and the Imperial City retaken by the Empire, we are left to wonder if his was an isolated case. On the surface, the Thalmor claimed to be the inheritors of Auriel, restoring the glory of their ancestors after centuries of humiliation. But they may be beginning to stray down the same path that seduced the Ayleids so long ago, the Siren's call of the Princes of Chaos. And if they stray too far down that path, then it will surely bring disaster, not only for their enemies, but ultimately for the Thalmor themselves. After all of this, what lesson is there to take away from the fall of the Ayleids? Is their story a cautionary tale? A warning about the dangers of arrogance and hubris? Is it a moral parable about the consequences of abandoning ethics in the pursuit of power? Or is it just a reminder that all civilizations, no matter how mighty, must one day decay into ruin? Perhaps, in the end, all of these lessons are true. For ultimately, the Ayleids remind us that a civilization's true inheritance is not solely in its material achievements, but also in the legacy it leaves in people's hearts and minds. While there are those who mourn the loss of the builders of the ancient monuments of the Heartland, most now remember the Ayleids as little more than cruel tyrants who built their power on the backs of the oppressed. There were undoubtedly Ayleids who were noble, such as King Dainar, and the kings who fought against the excesses of their Daedra-worshipping brethren. But rightly or wrongly, their deeds have been overshadowed by the cruelties of their compatriots. And in the end, whether noble or cruel, peaceful or violent, they lie together in the graveyard of history, conquered by the relentless march of time. Thank you for watching, and sticking around until the end. This video is a remake of the second video I ever made on this channel. My video skills have improved a lot since then, and there is so much lore around the Ayleids to dig into, so I thought it was worth revisiting the topic. Anyway, you can consider this video to be my definitive deep dive into the Ayleids, superseding everything in the original video. I'll leave the old video up for now if you're interested, but to be honest, it's a bit embarrassing to see how bad I was back then. Anyway, thanks to everyone who voted in the poll to choose which remake to do first. The Snow Elves video will be coming at some point, but I also have a couple other scripts in various stages of progress, so you'll have to wait and see what's next. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you don't want to miss anything. And until next time, take care.